in the interest of band connectivity.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Gupta, for the very kind introduction. And at the outset, I would like to thank Professor Ojha, Dr. Khanna, and the team and the management of IIITDM for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on this very important workshop on healthcare innovations during COVID-19 outbreak. The title of my talk is Healthcare Innovations and Ecosystems, COVID-19 and Beyond. And if you go to the next slide, I'll first share what the key aspects which will be covered in this particular lecture. This might be a very basic talk, but I understand that many of the participants here are students who are not from the health field or from the medical field. And I thought it might be useful for me to share some basic concepts before I go into deeper issues related to healthcare innovation. So I start off with a very basic concept of health and healthcare, and then healthcare innovations, then innovation life cycle, then ecosystems, what we mean by innovation ecosystems. After that, we will look at what was the pre-COVID-19 situation with respect to these variables. And then we look at what happened during COVID-19, again to these same above 4 variables. And then I will end with some thoughts on future directions related to healthcare innovations and ecosystems in the Indian context. Next slide, please. So what is health and healthcare? Now, I take the help of the World Health Organization definition here. It says that health is a state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. So this physical, mental, and social well-being could also be considered as the 3 dimensions of health. And then what is healthcare? Healthcare is aimed at maintaining, improving, or correcting the above dimensions through prevention, diagnosis, treatment, or rehabilitation. So these terms are important because we will see later on that healthcare innovations are also used either for prevention, diagnosis, treatment, or rehabilitation. Also, we also need to keep a concept in mind, which is the levels of healthcare. There are 3 levels: primary, secondary, and tertiary. So when I use the word primary, I'm referring to the first level of contact between the patient and the doctor. And it could be a very simple mild cough, cold, fever type of situation. When I'm talking of secondary level of healthcare, I'm talking of more complex problems which the primary level person or the doctor is unable to handle and gets referred to a secondary level. And when I'm talking of a tertiary level of healthcare, I'm talking of even more complex problems, perhaps which require admissions or surgeries or those kinds of in-hospital procedures, right? Now, healthcare innovation actually can happen at any of the above levels. That means it can happen either at the primary or the secondary or at the tertiary, or it can happen at any of the above dimensions, which is physical, mental, or social, or it can happen at multi-level and multi-dimension. So it could be a combination, permutation combination of all that we have talked about. Now, before I go into the next slide, I would just like to pause here a minute and reflect that we have been talking of innovation since yesterday afternoon, but let's just think for a moment, what is innovation? I was considering the very beautiful examples which was given yesterday, one which was given by Dr. Hirani in the first talk. He talked of oxygen enrichment technology, which he mentioned was costing around ₹5 lakhs to establish. And then Dr. Sharma showed us some very nice pictures of various kinds of innovations, of which let us pick one, the plastic sheet for the face shield, right? So we have two innovations. We have the oxygen enrichment technology costing 5 lakhs and a plastic shield for having the face mask, which might cost not more than 50 rupees. Now, what is the commonality between the oxygen enrichment technology innovation and the plastic sheet for the face shield? Both are innovations, isn't it? Now, if you think about this, if you think about the commonality, you then understand some key attributes of what an innovation consists of. To me, I saw three commonalities, and this can be expanded by the August gathering here. But the first commonality I saw was it was novel. That means it was new to the context. We didn't have that particular oxygen enrichment technology before, and Dr. Hirani and his team is introducing something new which was not there before. We didn't have plastic shields for face shield before, and the person who thought of this idea is introducing something new for the first time. So it's new to the context. So novelty can be considered as one attribute of innovation. The second attribute I thought which was common among these innovations was applicability. By applicability, I also mean replicability. So somebody who learns how to create plastic sheets for face shield multiple people can create it. It can be reproduced. Same with oxygen enrichment technology. Different companies can come up and use this oxygen enrichment technology to manufacture. So there is an applicability part and a replicability part to innovation. And the third commonality which I found among the various innovations which I shared yesterday was there was an intended benefit. It intended to benefit somebody. In the case of the plastic shield for the face shield, plastic sheet for the face shield, the benefit was in terms of preventing COVID-19 infection, preventing the virus infection. In the case of the oxygen enrichment technology, the intended benefit was to prevent death so that the person can survive with the enrichment oxygen. So if we think of these three attributes, novelty, applicability, and intended benefit, I think we are able to conceptualize what an innovation is. Right? So now let's see what is a healthcare innovation. Obviously, the innovation which is directed towards health becomes a healthcare innovation and would have these three attributes included in them. So in the next slide, I again take the help of the WHO in terms of understanding what is healthcare innovation. And according to the World Health Organization, healthcare innovation is to develop and deliver new or improved health policies, systems, products, and technologies, and services and delivery methods that improve people's health. This definition is very broad, but it's also very interesting because it covers from the micro to the macro. It talks of micro level interventions, which might be at the community level. It also talked of health policies, which is macro level intervention. It talks of systems. It talks of products and technologies. And it talks of services and delivery methods, which are processes. So it involves processes, products, micro level, macro level. And what does it say? The ultimate aim is to improve people's health. So here, the WHO definition is actually looking at a much broader perspective of what should be the aim of healthcare innovation, which is my second paragraph in this particular slide. And it says that the objectives of the health innovations are to improve efficiency, effectiveness, quality, sustainability, safety, and affordability. Now, these 6 variables which you see are also the objectives of universal health coverage, which is part of Goal 3 of Sustainable Development Goals. You might be aware that the United Nations General Assembly have framed Sustainable Development Goals for every country to achieve by 2030, and India is a signatory to that, of which your objective 3 or the Goal 3, universal health coverage, is part of Goal 3. So when you link the above 2 statements together, what emerges is that improving or optimizing the performance of the healthcare systems becomes the overarching goal of healthcare innovation. I think this is a very important point because when we're looking at healthcare innovation in the future, increasingly a systems perspective is going to be important. The other important thing is COVID-19 has actually exposed the vulnerability of healthcare systems across the world. Countries which have suffered maximum are the ones which had weak health systems. So it's like the weakest link in the chain. We say a chain is as strong as its weakest link. And COVID has shown us that the weakest link in our healthcare is our healthcare system. And hence, a systems approach to healthcare innovation becomes very important for us in the future. Next slide, please. Here, I will dwell a bit onto why and how healthcare innovations are different from other innovations. The first point, which is perhaps very obvious, healthcare innovations deals with matters of life and death. Suppose we have an innovation in a mobile phone or an innovation in a computer. If the innovation goes wrong or the innovation fails, it will not kill anyone. At the most, the computer will not work or the phone will not work. But in healthcare sector, if you have created an innovation, it doesn't work, it can cause harm, and to an extreme, it can also cause death. The second interesting thing is the link of healthcare with economy and the recession. I'm talking of economic recession here. Globally, healthcare is recession resistant. The demand for healthcare will never go down because health is unpredictable. We don't know when we can fall sick. And if we fall sick, we have to seek the help of healthcare services. It could be a healthcare worker, it could be a doctor, it could be a nurse, whoever it is. But the demand for healthcare is not going to go down. And it is a recession resistant. I would use the word now industry, which is in the third point. The healthcare sector actually has become one of the fastest growing industries globally. Before the COVID-19, the healthcare sector was worth some $8.45 trillion. And it is expected that by 2022, it will reach around $10 trillion. So in spite of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has decreased the healthcare spending by around 2.6%, we still see a projected growth in healthcare sector. So this is one of the fastest growing industries. And in India, it is the fourth largest employer also. The fourth point in my slide here is innovation, adoption, and diffusion in some sectors takes more time in the healthcare. For example, biotechnology, medical devices, and pharmaceuticals. You might be aware of it. It's the time taken for a product, let's say a pharmaceutical product, from the lab to actually reach the market takes an average of 12 to 15 years. There's a huge amount of R&D which goes in the lab, even for medical devices and biotechnology. So there's a huge lag time between the conception of an idea and actually what you see as a final product. That lag time is something very unique to healthcare innovations vis-a-vis innovations in other sectors. And the fourth point, and the last point in the slide is innovation, adoption, implementation, and scalability in healthcare system are dependent on the social, political, economic, institutional, and cultural context of a particular system. It is true for other innovations also, but I think in the healthcare, it is much more evident. I'll give you a very simple example. The vaccines for COVID-19. Everybody knows that the vaccines are going to prevent complications from the virus. We are going to prevent hospitalizations, or we're going to prevent death if we take the vaccine. But globally, there is a hesitancy in vaccine adoption. There is a hesitancy in implementation. Many countries have not started vaccination. There is a hesitancy in scalability. Why does this happen? When the scientific evidence is so clear that vaccines are helpful. In fact, France is the country in the world which has the largest vaccine hesitancy in the world. There was a survey which was done in France which showed that almost 50% of the population is hesitant to take vaccines. And it's a rich country, it can afford. There's no problem of shortages of it. So this brings the question of the interaction between the social, political, economic, and institutional, and the cultural context of a particular system. We cannot see innovation in isolation. We have to see innovation, adoption, implementation, and scalability within the context of a particular system. And each of these variables has a tremendous impact on the adoption, implementation, or scalability of any particular innovation. Next slide, please. Okay. Why are healthcare innovations needed? And I talk of a concept of voids or gaps. The concept of void was actually first given by Professor Khurana, who was professor in Harvard. And he talks of voids as systemic or institutional, which are actually roadblocks to efficiency, equity, and quality. So there are roadblocks to how we can do or provide health service efficiently. There are roadblocks to providing equitable healthcare services. So the rich, rich have better access, poor have less access. That is inequity. And there are roadblocks in terms of the quality of healthcare services, right? Sometimes we don't get good quality healthcare services. So all these are voids or gaps, which are systemic in nature. And they exist in all countries, in all healthcare systems at different degrees. So when you have voids, remember, although they are roadblocks, they also provide opportunities for innovation. And one of the biggest reasons innovations flourish globally is because there are voids. Now, what did COVID-19 do to these voids? It did two things in my perspective. One is it exposed the existing voids or widened them. Means we already had voids. Now it's become even more visible. So that's why we see problems of access, we see problems of affordability, we see problems of quality, which was already there, but more exaggerated or widened. And secondly, it also created new voids. Like we didn't have diagnostic tests for this new virus, so we had to create them. We didn't have a vaccine for the new virus, so we had to create them. So there were new voids created, which again, innovation tried to address. So these two things together leads to what is looked at in general terms as crisis. But an entrepreneur or an innovator actually flips the coin. And if you look at the opposite side of crisis, it's an opportunity. So in the next slide, I'll just share with you a very simple conceptual way of understanding what happened during the COVID-19. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this is actually a combination of two theories. If there is an economist here in the audience, you must have heard of Schumpeter. Schumpeter in 1912 talked of entrepreneur as the key driver of economic growth, using innovation as a tool, right? And the other theory which is combined here is a theory of Drucker, who was a management expert. And he talked of innovation as entrepreneurs exploiting or utilizing opportunities. So he says entrepreneurs are those who are able to identify opportunities and then they're able to tap the opportunities. So here you see a combination of the two theories, entrepreneur using innovation as a key to unlock opportunity. And what happened in COVID-19 situation to me is a classical combination of the theoretical application of what Schumpeter talked of in 1912 and Drucker talked of in management in the 80s. And we see these two things coming together. So the entrepreneur saw the COVID-19 situation as an opportunity to innovate, but that's just the beginning of the story. So what happens next? So let's go to the next slide. Now, if you see at the extreme left of the slide, you see where the entrepreneur and the opportunity stands. And when you unlock it, you open up a stream. I've called this as a convergent stream framework model. You can think of it as a river. I think in Jabalpur, there's Narmada, right? So you can think of Narmada. Now, the innovation has to flow from the creation of the stream to the end point of the stream or the river. And these stages are called as creation stage of an innovation, the adoption stage or the emergence stage of an innovation, and the diffusion or the scaling up stage of an innovation. But like a river, these stages are fluid. You cannot really demarcate where creation ends and where adoption begins, or where adoption ends and diffusion begins. These are very fluid. The other thing is the movement across these stages is dependent on multiple factors. And this I have shown as tributaries, like Narmada ki dharaएं pakad lijiye isko. So you have awareness and information access stream and funding, which are very critical in the beginning stage of an innovation, the creation stage. Then at the middle stage, when you are moving, the innovation is moving towards adoption. You have the mentoring and networking stream and funding, which makes it very important for it to go to the next stage, the diffusion of the scaling stage, where funding is not so important, but mentoring and networking is important. So these stages and this, the tributaries I have done based on my analysis of the healthcare startup sector in India, but the application of this cuts across other sectors also. It's not restricted to just healthcare startups. You will see a similar convergence stream framework model happening also in the case of non-healthcare sector innovations. So this, when you see these kinds of tributaries coming in, you see the line at the top. The bottom of it is time. That means this is happening over time. It takes time. We saw in the previous slide that healthcare innovation takes time. And then you have the context and the innovation ecosystem at the top. So the flow of innovation from the creation stage to the scaling stage is dependent on the interaction between the innovation ecosystem, which keeps changing with time. Okay. Now, this is something we need to conceptualize very clearly, that just having an idea to open the opportunity is at the beginning of the process. After that, any healthcare innovation has to go through this process. The unfortunate part is 80% of healthcare innovations do not make it to the last stage, that is diffusion and scaling. So if you have seen 20 new innovations in the COVID pandemic, you can be rest assured there will be 80 which have failed. That's why healthcare innovation is risky and not many people venture into it. Those who venture into it, hats off to them. They're one of the entrepreneurs, we call them, right? They are like the heroes. We talked of doctors as heroes during COVID. I think entrepreneurs are the next heroes. They are not very far away from the doctors. And many doctors become entrepreneurs also in this COVID-19 pandemic. So you could say doctors wore the entrepreneur gown during this particular period of time. In this slide, I also wanted to share what I talked of the ecosystem, the very, very important element, the interactions of which help or do not help the flow of healthcare innovation across this life cycle. So let me spend some time on what do we understand by the innovation ecosystem. Next slide, please. Very simply put, it's a dynamic collaborative network of individuals and organizations with an innovative object. So I have just taken a very simplistic diagram of nodes and networks, which I think many of the engineering students, computer science students might be very comfortable with this kind of a model. So nodes could be universities, the government, the entrepreneurs, the business houses, the foundations, or you could have innovation labs, manufacturers, or media. And they are interact. So at one particular stage, maybe the university has a collaboration with the government and the entrepreneur as part of that. So you could have incubation centers. I think your institute also has that, incubation centers or research parks, startup hubs, very classical. You could have entrepreneurs networking with business houses and innovation labs. So you could have that kind of a network. You could have government networking with all these kinds of sectors, providing the policy environment. So this is what is called as an innovation ecosystem. So it's a dynamic process of interaction between individuals and organizations which are part of different individuals who would perhaps be involved in mentoring, networking, who might be involved in the funding, who might be also providing information and access and training to entrepreneurs. So there are multiple, the streams which you saw basically come out of this networking or this ecosystem at different points in time. Next slide, please. And this is just for your information. We don't have to go much into it, but there are various forms of innovation ecosystem and they've evolved over time. We normally talk, easy to visualize is the collaborative innovation networks, where I just talked of universities, government, and the industry coming together, working together for a particular healthcare innovation project. You could have innovation clusters. You see special economic zones where you have the industry people very closely with the technology groups as well as the academia located geographically close by so that they can meet and discuss ideas easily. And then you have global value chains which actually expand this concept to beyond the national boundaries. So you could have interactions or networking collaborations across the borders, across different countries, and that is also happening today. And the last but not the least, and which has revolutionized the innovation ecosystem, in my opinion, is digitalization. Today, we are in the era of digital platforms. And one very easy example for you to understand an ecosystem is look at the Startup India portal. Go to the website of the Startup India portal, and you will see exactly the networking diagram which I showed you in the previous slide. You will see links to each of these groups of people or individuals or organizations, so vendors, funders, universities, business houses, all these kinds of links are there. And it's what kind of one place, it's India's largest entrepreneurship portal. And you will see a lot of information over there. It's an excellent, I would say, an initiative of how digitalization has been used to condense or bring about networking in a much faster, efficient, and effective way. Next slide, please. So when you look at the previous one, when you talk of health innovation ecosystem, the previous slide, please. Yeah. So the same innovation ecosystem, when applied or interacting with the healthcare sector, we call it as a health innovation ecosystem. So it includes the regulatory agencies, the science and technology agencies, and production agencies in dynamic interaction with healthcare professionals, hospitals, and national healthcare system. Right. Next one, please. So what was happening in the pre-COVID situation, right? Now, even before COVID, India was actually doing well in the innovation sector, especially the healthcare innovation. In fact, if you analyze the Startup India portal, after information technology, which your institute is the specialization in, the maximum number of startups is in the innovation technology setup. And then comes the healthcare sector. So India was already leapfrogging the use of healthcare technology innovations like mobile health devices, technology integration, healthcare data, and telemedicine services. And to my opinion, there were three things driving this change. One was policy. It is important. 2014, I think there was a very high level push towards Make in India. And then we had the move towards Stand Up India, and then the Digital India. Now, these three initiatives led in 2016 to create Startup India, which I think got established in January 2016. It has completed 5 years now. Now, the Startup India policies and these other policies are very strong driving forces of innovation in this country, not only in healthcare, but also across other sectors. The other thing which drove innovation in healthcare, in my opinion, is the epidemiological shift which happened in the disease pattern. You see, we are a country which is unfortunately having the dubious distinction of having double burden of disease. That means we have communicable diseases like malaria, TB, infectious diseases on one hand. We also have the non-communicable diseases like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, which are also there. And in fact, COVID has exposed this NCD pandemic, or you could say NCD endemic, which is happening in the country. As you saw, you are aware that a lot of deaths happened in COVID because of comorbidities, and comorbidities were happening because of non-communicable disease. So this epidemiological transition is also a very important reason why we need innovation. And the last but not the least is a demographic transition, wherein we are seeing a change in the demographic profile of the population. Currently, we have more young population, but this is going to change, and we are going to have more elderly population. In fact, it is estimated by 2025, we'll have almost 19% of the population elderly in this country, which is currently around 9%. So this has driven the healthcare innovation change, and it has helped in the ranking of startup ecosystems, the development of information, and increase in knowledge and technology-based enterprises. So India is actually now currently, based on the report of the Global Innovation Index, which was published last month, we are the third largest startup ecosystem in the world and ranked fourth in the National Entrepreneurship Context Index. Next slide, please. This is my analysis of the Startup India portal and the various stages in which the startups are. Again, this is specific to healthcare startups. But remember the diagram I showed you in creation, creation and adoption and diffusion. So if you see, almost 55% of startups are in the early stage. So they're in the early part of the stream, the early stage in the river, while 45% are in the late stages, which is the early traction and scaling stages. So which is not bad. So we have kind of almost 50 proportion in the early stage and the late stage. Next slide, please. And this shows the split up of the healthcare innovation sector into subsectors. Health and wellness is pretty high, almost above 20%, 25%. And you have biotechnology at the least. But each of these sectors has been growing during the COVID-19. So there was a huge surge of medical devices, pharmaceutical and biotechnology innovations during COVID-19. Next slide, please. So what did COVID-19 do to the innovation life cycle? So the stream which I showed you, we had time at the top of the stream. Remember, below the innovation ecosystem, we had time. So in my opinion, COVID contracted time. So if there was 15 years or 10 years to begin or develop an innovation from the ideation stage to a scaling up stage, COVID brought down it to maybe even years or perhaps even months, actually, not even years, it's months. And this is one of the things which we will see when we talk of COVID-19 vaccines. So the time between the creation and the adoption and scaling was drastically contracted during COVID-19. And why did that happen? We'll see in the next slide. Three things, in my opinion. One is cross-functional collaboration. Transdisciplinary collaboration, very, very, very essential. Engineers, doctors, scientists, biologists, computers, experts, data science, everybody had to sit together and collaborate. This, I think, has been unprecedented in the world, that we had such strong cross-functional collaboration. Silos were broken overnight. Usually what happens is engineers, they prefer to be in their own domain, doctors prefer to be in their own domain, but COVID actually broke the silos, which is a very, very good thing to happen. Secondly, open source data sharing. Never before in the world we have seen such openness in the way countries have shared the data. One of the classical examples is the gene sequencing sharing of the virus, which helped in development of the vaccine. And the third thing which happened was decreasing administrative barriers. There were a lot of bureaucratic delays initially in healthcare innovation, and a lot of this was streamlined and decreased in the case of COVID. But I will just share with you, there's a bit of a catch here. We have the positive example of COVID-19 vaccine, which is a classical case of cross-functional collaboration, open source data sharing, and decreased administrative barriers. But we also have a negative example of plasma therapy, which is very unfortunate. You see, plasma therapy was approved for use in many, many countries globally without proper evidence from clinical trials. And I think we have to be a bit careful where we draw the line between when regulators should, in their enthusiasm of treating a crisis, approve a product or healthcare innovation, and where we should say that, no, this causes harm. And this is very important, which I will discuss in the later part of this presentation, that we have to be careful in the systems level, what innovations we actually approve and what we don't. Next slide, please. And I'm just naming a few COVID-19 specific ecosystems. You can look up the websites of this, it will give you all the details. We had Kavach, Center for Augmenting War Against COVID-19 Health Crisis. It is an initiative of Department of Science and Technology. CIDA, which is COVID-19 Innovation Deployment Accelerator, initiative of Department of Biotechnology, anchored by CCAMP, which is Center for Accelerated Molecular Platforms, and in partnership with multiple partners. They funded 30 startups. Kavach funded 54 startups. Venture Center, which is an initiative of CSIR, in selected war against COVID-19, 25 startups were selected. And something which you might have already experienced, the COVID-19 Vaccine Intelligence Network, COVID, is also a digital ecosystem, which you as a consumer can select vaccines and choose where you want to take vaccines. And also the providers of vaccinations are using it for the logistics related. Next slide, please. So finally, I have a few slides on the future directions. The first thing is, I think we have moved from a sprint mode of innovation now into a marathon mode of innovation. And this is important to understand because you see, the way you train for a sprint is different from how you train for a marathon. So healthcare innovations the last year has happened in a sprint mode. So there is some new virus, let's find a diagnostic test. There is some new treatment, let's find a vaccine. But I think the realization is now dawning that COVID is here to stay, whether we like it or not. And if it's going to stay, we need to be more adaptive and smart in dealing with it. So it requires a different kind of thinking. It requires a more therav to work. It's not something like a crisis now. It's kind of going to be with us. The new normal is going to be with COVID. And then if that happens, then the short and the long-term uptake of healthcare innovation becomes critical issues. And the third point here is, how do we ensure then that healthcare innovations are not only effective, but also contributing to equitable and sustainable healthcare systems. And here I would like to introduce you to a concept which is called as a health technology assessment, HTA, in health innovation ecosystems. Next slide, please. So HTA is basically a multidisciplinary process that uses explicit methods to determine the value of a health intervention and technology at different points in its life cycle, with the purpose to inform decision making in order to promote an equitable, efficient, and high quality health system. I've been working in this area for the last 10 years, and we have a program at TIS, which is the only university in South Asia to have this program wherein we integrate HTA into an MPH curriculum. And it's an example of a frugal innovation. We don't charge the healthcare system anything for it. And we train around 20 to 25 students every year. And the findings of this program have now been published. I'm sharing the link, which you can look at. It led to a SMART framework. And I'll just explain what is SMART is. SMART is being simple. We don't have to have very complex ways of doing HTA. Simple is S. M is mixed methodology. HTA relies heavily on economic evaluation techniques, cost benefit analysis, cost effectiveness analysis, economic modeling, which are quantitative in nature. But from our experience, we have seen in the last 10 years that in India, the cultural issues and acceptability of technology is as important as cost benefit analysis. So we advocate for a mixed methodology, where you have quantitative and qualitative studies mixed together in the research design when you're doing an HTA. The A part of SMART stands for academic institutionalization. That means, see, currently in this, we are able to train maybe 25 candidates every year, students. But if other institutes pick up this program, we would be able to create a critical mass of trained researchers in this area, in this initiative. R stands for relevance, contextual. So we don't want to repeat what the West has done or the so-called development. We need to have solutions which are contextually relevant. And T is time. Very, very important. In our program, they have to create an HTA report within 6 months. That's very important for policy. Policy cannot wait for 5 years, 6 years for the research to get completed. Like, you need to have very timely policies. And then we create a policy brief document for the healthcare policy making. So this is the SMART framework, and there are details in this link which you can read. Next slide, please. I'll just share with you just one more example just before I close. We have this is an HTA which I did for this first HTA on a COVID-19 specific diagnostic test. You might have heard of this, the FELUDA test. It's basically a very complicated acronym, FNCA-S9, editor linked uniform detection assay. But the HTA was done on this to find out its cost effectiveness. That means there was an economic evaluation done, its affordability and sustainability for healthcare systems. So we use a systems perspective in this. And this paper has been published. You can look at the link here. And it was shown in this analysis through this HTA that it was very cost effective. It would reduce India's testing by almost 1/3 current testing strategy. So RT-PCR is very costly. The FELUDA was equally effective, much less cost, affordable, and it would also help in equity because more people would be able to afford that particular test. So that test got approved by the Drug Control General of India. It was a CSIR initiative. FELUDA was a classical case of the government policy and a private company coming together in a government lab, developing that technology, which was an innovation from CRISPR. CRISPR is used for cancer treatment, and that got changed or modified for a novelty it was created as a novel tool for detection of SARS-CoV-2. So that's the beauty of this particular innovation, and it has a very good effect on the health systems in terms of sustainability. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So in the previous slide, we had this. This is what I would consider the previous slide. Yeah. So this is, I leave you with these thoughts for the future of HT and health innovation systems. If you remember, I talked of voids at the beginning of this talk. So you have voids at the bottom of this diagram, and then you have innovative health technologies to address these voids. What I'm proposing is if we have health technology assessment also within the health innovation ecosystem, it will help us provide evidence on the value of this technology to the health system in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, equity, quality, right? And once you do that, you provide evidence for policymakers to either adapt or reject that particular health technology. And this forms within part of the health innovation ecosystem and country ecosystem. So this is something which might be useful for us when we're looking at the future of healthcare innovations in Indian context. Next slide, please. So to conclude, this is my conclusion in the last slide. Healthcare innovations involve multidimensional and multi-level interactions which make it complex. We have seen we have 3 dimensions, 3 levels, and innovations can happen at all these levels or a combination of these levels. And that's why we see even the WHO tells us a systems approach to healthcare innovation is very useful. Systems approach. So when you're looking at creating, if there are entrepreneurs among you, innovators among you, when you're trying to think of a new innovation, think of it from a systems perspective. What is its value to the system? Does it create efficiency? Does it create equity? Does it address quality? These are important questions you need to answer. We also saw during COVID that crisis can be a driver of innovation. Remember, crisis and opportunity are 2 sides of the same coin. We also looked at, now we are saying we're moving to a marathon stage. So COVID-19 requires technical as well as adaptive challenges. When you're in a marathon, you need to adapt. Technical is quick fix solutions. We are seeing that quick fix solutions are not working. And adaptive challenges are required because these are systemic voids which are already existing and widen. So we need to adapt and see how we can address, how innovations can address this issue. The other important point is innovations need not be expensive or complicated. Simplest solutions are many times the most effective ones. And I'm a big advocate for the face mask. Very simple, cost-effective technology, I would say. Very, very effective. There is a Lancet study in June 2020, which has done a systematic review and meta-analysis of the effectiveness of masks and physical distancing. It has been clearly shown that physical distancing of 1 meter and use of face masks is extremely effective in preventing against COVID-19 infections. Mind you, vaccines do not prevent infections. They prevent complications of infections or severity of infections. So the mask today remains the most cost-effective strategy against COVID-19. And last but not the least, I propose that HTA will have an important role to play in the health innovations ecosystems in the journey from destructive creation to creative destruction. To me, the virus is a destructive creation, but if you have healthcare innovations, you can have creative destructions. And when I say destruction, I mean destruction of the voids, destruction of the inefficiency, destruction of inequity, and destruction of poor quality. So let us creatively work towards addressing these voids and create a world which is more sustainable for the future. Thank you. Thank you for your time and your patience. The last slide is on thanks. Take care and stay safe.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Mukherjee. I mean, it was a very complete and systematic, composed talk. I can tell you, like, we here in IIIT DM Jabalpur, like, we have a startup center for having startup, and also our institute is focusing on this healthcare domain is one of the primary area. So, I mean, your talk is very relevant to us also. I mean, how our students, like how they can take advantage of the situation, the opportunities. Thank you very much for such a nice talk. If somebody has some question, because we are slightly there, late on our schedule. But anyway, if somebody has a quick question, then we can have 1 or 2 questions. Can raise your hand.
Yeah, thank you, please. Yeah, I would be happy to answer any questions or clarifications.
So maybe like I have a question, like people like us, even though we have this startup in place, but then how institute like academic institute like ours can contribute in this startup ecosystem and the kind of, like you said, that a digital platform that is to which is enabling technology to make this ecosystem like more efficient.
Right. So you already have a startup center, am I right? So you
Yes,
already have started, working on it. So this is the part of where you can network with, let's say, industry groups which are interested in either funding. And the government today has come up with a lot of schemes for facilitating university and business collaborations, industry collaborations. So for you, I think the best way would be to look up at the setup portal and see which area you're working in and who would be the right people to go to for funding and who would lead the process. So it's what happens in a networking ecosystem. It's a co-creation of value. So once you identify the right people and the right organizations, then you all sit together and brainstorm on what's the best step forward. So it's a multidisciplinary process and a co-creation. Right?
Yeah, wonderfully explained regarding the ecosystem and the kind of like drivers and the dimensions, right? You mentioned many dimensions. One of them, like economics, also. I just saw that in that slide, this economics is what missing. So probably, I mean, you have spoken out, but then yeah, maybe because of that slide. So thank you very much, Professor Mukherjee. I mean, so kind of you for like giving your time and yeah. Now we have next session, and I think Dr. Shaman should be like taken care of. So Dr. Shaman, if you, I'm giving it to you. Dr. Shaman.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let us start the second session of today's talk. Again, good morning to everyone. I welcome you to this session of the workshop once again. First, let me to introduce our honorable speaker for this session, Professor